Welcome to the NFL target and ownership percentage for Week 4. I'm Jason Gilbo, J Gilbo 11. With me is Ricky Sanders at R Sanders DFS. Taking a look at Week 4 plays here, talking targets, touches, salaries, everything pretty much under the sun. Special day because we get Le'Veon Bell back finally, and that's who we get to talk about first.
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to have him back. And if there was any worry about throwing him back in there, Tomlin basically said they're going to use him plenty. So I think it was pretty obvious with the way they were using D'Angelo Williams, to be honest. They were running him into the ground like 30, 35 times a game, basically like they didn't care. They needed what they needed out of him, and then it was Le'Veon Bell time. So, of course, I expect Williams to be at least a little involved still, but he kind of faded completely out of the picture the last go-around when this happened. So I still think I got Bell projected. I think it's 24 total touches, 8 targets. I think he's going to be the guy. I think at worst it's like a 75-25 split. I mean, they love this guy. As long as he stays out of trouble moving forward, I think they'll forgive him, and he's going to go back to being, him and David Johnson, arguably RB1, RB2 in fantasy.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, you look here, you talk about the Chiefs in terms of a matchup. I mean, you have allowed the 11th most points to back so far this season. It's not a perfect matchup, but I think overall it's not a bad one either.
Right. That's my thinking about it is, like, if you're not going to use Le'Veon Bell, it's got to be a pretty awful matchup, and this certainly isn't that.
Yeah. Looking at Mark Ingram here, you talk about next, going up against San Diego. Once again, I feel like, it's usually a weekly thing with Mark Ingram here, and a lot of that really has to do with just overall pricing.
Yeah, I like that he finally scored his first career receiving touchdown last week. I like that they kicked up his workload. He carried the ball 15 times, which still isn't, great. But when you talk about a Saints team on the road where Breeze is much worse, they usually like to ride Ingram a little bit more. If he's involved, catching passes and he's got that floor, he's clearly the goal line guy, even though, on the goal line, they tend to pass a decent amount, but I think on the road is a different story where they won't get as creative. They'll use Ingram more. I think he's kind of a safe option away from, the likes of Melvin Gordon if you want to go in a different direction.
Yeah, I definitely like Ingram. I mean, as you mentioned, I think in terms of it being an RB2, he's a pretty safe bet to kind of get his touches and get his workload. You do talk about Melvin Gordon next, who, obviously a great spot. We've just seen the Falcons running back duo just shred the Saints.
Yeah, that's my thinking here. I'm way on the Melvin Gordon bandwagon as is for yearly, for anything. I've liked his talent since he came in. I was disappointed last year, but with that injury to Woodhead, once we started seeing his snaps go over 50 and him be a workhorse, you got to love him. His price is starting to, get corrected. But in this matchup, we saw what those Falcons backs did, and that's nothing new. I mean, the Saints defense allowed the most yards per carry last year. So this is pretty much just a carryover of their defense still not being any good. They had 194 yards and 4 touchdowns between 2 of them last week. There's just one Melvin Gordon. They're not really splitting carries. Now, I wouldn't expect those kind of numbers, but I do think, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns is well within reach here, which is why I think mostly everyone's going to be on him.
Yeah, he's a really tough fade this week. I think, one, you look at the price, certainly still reasonable, even though it's come up. You look at the Saints defense, shortened week, now traveling to San Diego. It really just kind of all adds up for him.
Yeah. I mean, for cash games, I think there's really one option for your running backs. I think you go Gordon, and I think you go Hyde on DraftKings and FantasyDraft. If you want to differentiate beyond that, use a third running back in the flex spot on FantasyDraft. You could use 2. Go ahead. But I think those are the guys that are going to be heavily owned, and for their price tags, they make just too much sense.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And then we're talking another one here, and LeGarrette Blount, who you're kind of praising Bill Belichick here. Finally, we get some consistency.
Yeah, I don't think it's really a Belichick thing either. I think this is just like he has to by default because they're on quarterback 2 or 3, depending on who suits up this week. It sounds like Garoppolo's still hurting. Brissett's still hurting too, so we really don't know what they're going to do at quarterback. And with that being the case, Belichick can't replace the running game with like a short passing game because we can't trust these guys like we can trust Brady. So I think for one more week, we have reliable LeGarrette Blount. He's going to get 25 carries by default, probably 100 yards, probably a touchdown. While I don't love a guy who hasn't been targeted in cash games, especially a guy with Bill Belichick as his coach, I think he's a lock and load in tournaments because what we've seen from him so far.
Yeah, I like the points per dollar return here with his 5K price tag on DraftKings, and even 9,900 on FantasyDraft isn't that bad. 7,500 on FanDuel feels a little stiff for me, just in terms of kind of the guys around him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, at that price tag, it's viable, but I don't like using those guys with the serious potential downside. Blunt, let's say he doesn't get into the end zone by some miracle. Brissett runs it in or throws it to Gronkowski or something. They just don't decide to use him. I mean, you're looking at 9 fantasy points if he goes for 90 yards, which is still a good game. But if he's not getting targeted, like catching any passes whatsoever, I just see too much downside.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. In terms of value here, Carlos Hyde, really great prices across all 3 sites. And at this point, it doesn't even matter really how bad the team is around him. He looks like he's going to just kind of be the guy.
Yeah, I don't understand the price whatsoever. I mean, this is a guy who scored 2 touchdowns yet again last week. It was his second time in 3 games. 23 attempts for 88 yards, which was huge because the game script, would have suggested the exact opposite, but Kelly kept pounding away at the run game. Now you got to expect this one to be competitive. I mean, I think it's a 2.5 spread, if I remember that from the last time I looked. But either way, it's projected to be a close game. It's 3-point is what it says in the article, but I think it moved to 2.5 against the Cowboys. Now no Dez Bryant, it's looking like. So this is going to be a close game, which is why, at 4,200 on DraftKings, why wouldn't you use a workhorse back who's the goal line back, who's been targeted 7 times in 3 games? I mean, it's just when I mentioned it before in this segment, when a bargain comes along that's that good, you can't really pass. It's really an option between him and Jordan Howard. I think he's the safer option. Howard was targeted 6 times, but at any point the Bears offense can score 3 points and punt 10 times. So I think Hyde's a little bit safer.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree in terms of being safe. Carlos Hyde is kind of the guy you want. I do like Jordan Howard this week. I think he could be kind of an interesting value to kind of pair with him as well. Looking at wideouts here, talking Antonio Brown. Obviously, last week it was just kind of a lot of garbage time in a game that really their offense wasn't clicking at all.
Yeah, I'm not worried. I mean, Antonio Brown, the best receiver in the game, they're listed as 5.5-point favorites this week. So Vegas expects him to turn it around. That's why I've got him listed pretty heavily in terms of ownership percentage, because receivers a tough wasteland this week. Honestly, I don't think any of the top guys other than Antonio Brown are guys that I'm really comfortable with going in cash. So if you're going to do anything, go with Antonio Brown, who's pretty much, a lock for those double-digit targets. Ben loves him. The Chiefs have been kind of tough against quarterbacks, but, we look at the matchups. Fitzpatrick played arguably the worst game ever last week. I mean, it was that bad. He played the Texans the week before. So I don't think we have a true sample size, even though, they were tough against quarterbacks and receivers last year. I think Brown's good enough to get it done against virtually anyone. Again, it's kind of like Bell. If the matchup isn't god-awful, I think Brown is certainly in play.
Yeah, I mean, he's just one of those guys where it's so elite. It's, if the matchup's average, it's an above-average matchup for him. He's just that good. Right. In terms of Alshon Jeffrey, I like a lot, and you kind of list him as a contrarian option going up against this Detroit team who's allowed 10 passing touchdowns already this season.
Yeah, I actually like both Jeffrey and Kevin White. I'm trying to debate which one I'm going to end up using. I'll probably end up using both tournaments. But, I mean, this clearly seems like a game where the Lions are going to get ahead. The Bears are just brutal. They're going to be missing Kyle Fuller now. So that's going to allow for the Lions to move the ball even easier for them, which means the Bears will be coming from behind and throwing. I think what helped them last week was the fact that they incorporated Miller, the fact that they incorporated White, instead of just throwing the jump balls to Jeffrey. So now that they've done that, it seems like they can go back to Jeffrey, this week. Darius Slay is a tough matchup, so if Jeffrey gets a lot of him, that's why I'm fine using Kevin White, who's pretty darn cheap. But I do think that, this is still the top guy. Just because Miller scored twice last week doesn't mean they forgot about Jeffrey. Playing from behind is a good game script for him. And again, I got him projected at 10 targets. So there's not much up there when you're paying up. I actually think I would probably prefer Marvin Jones in cash games, but Jeffrey's the guy in tournaments.
Yeah, I definitely agree. He's definitely the nice pivot. And you look, I mean, Kevin White had about 13 targets last week, and you projected Jeffrey for 10. I definitely in agreement that I think that kind of evens out. And then also tossing Miller into the mix. Looking at T.Y. Hilton, if you got that London game in there, obviously coming off just a monster week against the Chargers, obviously that 60-yard touchdown, towards the end of the game really helped out, but he's the guy.
Yeah, I was, without Dante Moncrief, it's kind of his show. So if you're going to play the Thursday night game, this is the reason I would play the Thursday night. Landry's questionable, so I don't think you're jumping to roster anyone in that Thursday game. But this is the guy you're jumping. I mean, this is Luck's guy. He's got to use him by default. The Jaguars defense been struggling, allowed the 11th most fantasy points to the position. Coming off 174 yards, this guy, I just don't think the Jaguars have anyone who can cover him, and they got to heavily target him by default with what they got left. We don't know if Frank Gore has a whole lot left in the tank. He's kind of doing his best to establish a balance, but that offensive line is bad. So T.Y. Hilton's kind of the guy who gets heavily involved by default.
Yeah, definitely. What about his teammate there, Philip Dorsett? I mean, could he be kind of an intriguing punt play this week?
Yeah, I think, both those receivers, I think, again, this whole Colts passing offense is what you go to if you're playing that Thursday night, because it's not included in any of the other slates, and it'll probably come at low ownership because, if people are playing Thursday, a lot of them like to use Thursday guys. A lot of them, go to the Monday night, which I actually think sucks this week. I wouldn't care about using that. But, yeah, I mean, Luck, Hilton, Dorsett. Dorsett's kind of a big play guy. This is a defense that's been allowing the big plays, so I definitely think both of them are viable.
Yeah, certainly. And looking at this next one here, Jeremy Maclin, who you talk about, we talked about Pittsburgh. We talked about them being favorites. This kind of has it translate into that right now.
Yeah, with the Steelers favorite, I think they're going to come out and show a much better showing this week than they did against the Eagles last week. I liked them last week, but now I really like them at home. So if we're projecting or we're agreeing with Vegas, which I definitely do, I think the Steelers at some point are going to, have to come out. Then they're going to be playing from behind. And the good thing is the Steelers only have one sack all season. They have not been pressuring opposing quarterbacks. So for that reason, Macklin's got kind of a difficult matchup against Cockrell, even though they match up on the other side of the field on a decent amount of time. So I think that, he'll see him some of the time. He'll some of the time be able to run through free, and Alex Smith's never going to be, heavily under duress. So really, this whole passing game runs through Kelsey, Maclin, and the backs. I think Kelsey's okay option, but really, I think Macklin's the one who's going to be making the biggest splash here. He's got a reasonable price tag, $6,000 on DraftKings, 11.3 on FantasyDraft. So he's priced like a low-end wide receiver too. And if they do get behind early, I mean, this is a guy who can put up 100 and a touchdown.
Yeah, no, I definitely like him a lot. I think he fits into a lot of those kind of cash game lineups a little bit easy this week just because of those prices. Last one here, a fun one, Terrell Pryor, who we saw. He's basically the offense at this point.
Yeah, I don't think you can fade him on FantasyDraft or DraftKings. I didn't see his price yet on FanDuel. I guess it's on this article. It is $7,000, which is more than I'm really comfortable with, but it's still, honestly, for a guy who's the whole offense is viable. I mean, he played 82 snaps last week. 14 of them were at quarterback. He completed 3 of 5 passes for 35 yards. He even lined up at halfback once. He rushed a few times. He rushed 4 times, in fact, for 21 to TD, and then he lined up in the slot 4 times, and the rest of his 82 snaps were played on the outside. So this is a guy who, if he's quarterback, he's going to be throwing the ball or running the ball, so you're going to be getting fantasy points. If he's lined up as a receiver, he was the guy they were targeting most heavily. He was targeted 14 times. So until Josh Gordon comes back, this is a guy who's basically a combination of a low-end quarterback, too, because he's running when he's going behind the line, and a guy who's targeted like a wide receiver 1. So at this, what is it, 4,200 on DraftKings, I want to say? Let me double, 4,300. I mean, you can't pass on a guy who's the focus of the entire offense. There's just so many ways he can get it done.
If you played NBA DFS, it feels like Russell Westbrook when Durant was injured. I mean, that's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah, and he's mad cheap. So it's just, if you don't play him in cash, I don't think we've seen a guy as heavily owned as Terrell Pryor will be owned this week. Maybe him and Melvin Gordon in cash games are going to be pushing, 75, 80%.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. Tight ends this week. I like tight ends. I feel like this is a week where you really do. I mean, you got 5 options here I feel are viable, and you can even, toss in a couple more names. But in terms of paying up, you talk about Jordan Reed. Obviously, Gronkowski's back, but I still think Reed's really the guy.
Yeah, I think if you're paying up in tournaments, Reed is the guy because I think everyone's going to be on Greg Olsen, including myself. Jordan Reed has been playing 80% of the snaps, which is more than last year. He's been getting targeted 8 times a game. He just hasn't gotten it done. I mean, Kirk Cousins has been really ineffective in the red zone. He's thrown the ball, I think it's 22 times, completed 7 passes, and only thrown for 1 touchdown. So I think some serious positive regression is coming here. I mean, basically the matchup for Cousins is the exact same for Tannehill last week. Same team, same kind of offensive structure where the running game really hasn't been getting it done. He's got a bunch of good receivers, so he's going to drop back and throw a ton of times. He's attempted the 4th most passes. I think this is a week finally where Reed gets it going. I really like him as a tournament option because, he's slightly more than Olsen. I think Olsen's safer, but with that being said, Reed definitely has some monster games left in him.
Yeah, definitely. And then Olsen, is going to cut into that ownership because you look at this matchup against the Falcons, it's just a big blinking light in terms of using him this week.
Yeah, I don't see how you don't use him and Newton in cash. I mean, there's just such a high floor between the two of them. We saw what the Saints did last week. We saw what Kobe Fleener did last week, even more importantly. I mean, this is a guy who was dropping passes and still managed 100 and a touchdown. Olsen's the #1 scoring tight end in fantasy. This Falcons team's giving it up to tight end. So really, what more do you need? I mean, you can use him anywhere, but there is a case to be made, like I said, in tournaments for fading him because I think Reed and even Gronkowski at the upper echelon are viable.
Yeah, I definitely like those guys there. And we kind of dive into the value. Kyle Rudolph, who has kind of been a guy who's, I won't say under the radar, but targets are certainly coming his way.
Yeah, to me, this looks like he's finally emerging as a tight end 1, kind of by default. The running game's not very good, so they kind of have to find ways to make up for it. And really that helps them at the goal line because, A, they're not getting to the goal line that much, but B, when they do, I mean, that offensive line's so bad that you might as well drop back and go to your huge target, which has kind of been their thinking so far. So I think Rudolph's going to be the guy in the red zone pretty much on a weekly basis. And the Giants' defense has looked improved, but they've allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends. So the matchup lines up yet again for Rudolph. I wouldn't avoid him this week.
Yeah, it's really tough, and especially at that price. I mean, DraftKings too, 3,400 certainly reasonable. Talking about Kobe Fleener next, you and I have just been kind of joking around about him. I mean, finally blew up against the Falcons, which, in terms of the matchup, it definitely paid off, and he's got another one this week, but this time on the road here.
Yeah, I mean, Fleener's a guy who you got to use in tournaments pretty much on a weekly basis. He's really annoying, but we saw last week he played a terrible game and still came through with a monster game because his quarterback is so incredibly accurate that he's going to look for him. Supposedly the report that came out today is Breeze trusts him a little more, whatever that means. But the Chargers have allowed the 6th most receptions to tight ends. Fleener's price has remained the same. So after last week, even on the road now, I think Fleener has some value. It's kind of a crapshoot, so I would never use him in cash games because of his questionable hands. But again, matchup good, coming off a big game, positive reports, there's a lot of signs here.
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, you look, I think we've seen the struggles, but the targets have remained there, which is encouraging. You have him projected at 7. That's just about what he's averaging this season. Looking at Zach Miller, I think he's going to be the guy who a lot of people, if they're not using Olsen, I think Miller is going to be the guy a lot of people pay down to.
Yeah, I mean the Lions are definitely susceptible to the tight end position. He scored twice last week. Hoyer seems like he's looking at him. He was kind of a guy who made it work last year with Gary Barnidge for a short stretch, so he obviously will throw to his tight ends. I don't think they're going to be able to get the run game going all that much. The offensive line, other than the guards, just stinks. So Jordan Howard's going to be a guy who's targeted in the pass game. It's kind of going to be a game where I think Hoyer has to throw way more than the Bears are comfortable with. They're going to be coming from behind. If they do get into the red zone, Miller's going to get some looks. So, Jeffrey, Miller, White, there's a a case to be made for any of them. I don't think all of them are going to be viable. In fact, I'm not sure even two of them are going to be viable, but I am sure that the Bears coming from behind are going to throw enough to make at least one of them, worthwhile playing in large tournaments. So that's why I kind of listed both of them. I think Miller for the price tag makes the most sense. So if you're looking for safe and cash games, he's got a high enough floor where I think he's going to pay off there.
Yeah, I definitely do too. And we'll kind of wrap things up here. I mean, do you have any thoughts about kind of Brian Hoyer just as a play in general? I mean, pretty much bare min across all the sites this week.
I mean, I'm a fan of cheap quarterbacks. Let's put it that way. But I don't know if the talent around him is good enough for him to sustain, enough drives for him to finish with 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is kind of what you're looking for if you roster him. He did finish with 23 fantasy points. I think it was last week. So if he, come close to that again this week, I'm way in for it. But, I think the punter is going to be the most heavily used guy on the Bears offense, as is always the case. The Bears will get behind. The question is, can he be a garbage time hero? If you believe the case is yes, then use him. The price tag is the only reason that I would even consider it. But I think, in a game that the Lions are going to run away with it, the game script sets up pretty perfectly.
Yeah, it definitely does. And if you played last year, I mean, you probably dabbled with some Brian Hoyer in cash games at times.
Yeah. I mean, there were some matchups where he had the receivers that we liked, and it was just a good situation for him. So I think the targets on the Bears are certainly viable. You got a first round pick, you got Jeffrey, you got Miller, you got a back that can clearly catch the ball now. So there is a case to be made for him. I will say that I prefer the Lions if I'm going with anyone in that game, because I think, if the Bears are trying to scratch and claw their way back into the game, that means Stafford went nuts and put them up.
Yeah, we definitely saw last round that Stafford went to town on Chicago twice. So.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
That's going to wrap things up for this week's Ownership and Target Report. Be sure to check out DaveFantasyCafe.com for all great tools and content.